everyone, welcome to another bouquet making and chat video. A lot of you guys really enjoyed the last time I did this, so we're going to replicate this again because I have my second flower subscription pickup of the year. So we are doing July bouquets. This is what the bouquets are going to look like, and we are going to chat about pricing. So not the traditional topic of how much do I price something per stem, but there was something recently posted in a Cut Flowers 101 group where the admin posted something along the lines of, can we stop shaming flower farmers for either giving their flowers away for free or underpricing? And the evidence to support that was McDonald's has been out there for 85 years. They sell $2.19 cheeseburgers. They're able to effectively compete against places like Texas Roadhouse, Outback Steakhouse. These are all chains in the United States, but they all sell burgers at a little bit of a higher price. And of course, if you go to your local bistro or whatever it is, you might even now find a burger for $15. In fact, the other day I was telling some coworkers, we went to Union Street Cafe because we got taken out. And I had said that I remember coming here as a college student and their sister restaurant sold a $27 burger, which this is about like 12 years ago, was considered just astronomical. And today you walk around and there are plenty of $27, $30 burgers. So the premise is that if it works for burgers, then it also works for flowers. There's enough room for all of us to price wherever we want. And at the end of the day, the admin made this point that pricing is a reflection of marketing. So how you price your flowers, like this is a $25 bouquet, signals a lot about the quality of the flowers, what you're getting. It adds to the perceived value of the flower. So I want to talk a bit about that because while I agree with some parts of that, especially the piece where pricing your flowers is a certain type of marketing, I would say that after 4 years, I disagree with this general sentiment that you can really price your flowers however you want using burgers as an analogy. But before we get into that meaty topic, I do want to talk about what goes into these bouquets. So last video was a dramatically different type of bouquet. In fact, there's probably only one flower here that is the same, and that is yarrow. And yarrow is totally on its way out. We did not have rose lilies, we had regular lilies. The point is that we are now in this later stage of transition between late spring and summer, which sounds strange to some of you guys because it's already mid-July. But for me, I don't tend to do a lot of my annuals until later in the summer because I know about the summer slump and just how slow sales are. But I want to talk a little bit more about what's going into these bouquets. Let me show you what I have. The main reason why I continue selling this time of year is because I grow Lisianthus, and these have become one of my favorite flowers. And they've also become one of those flowers that I anchor my farm around, especially in the summer. I really try to promote this concept of Lisianthus being super specialty, which they are, because we are going to talk a little bit about my growing price with these. They're pretty. I call them a thornless rose. And I also say that designers would drive literally hours from New York City and Philadelphia to our cooperative to buy these. And that was a completely true statement. So I tell that to my customers, and this is a very high maintenance crop. It's a princess, but if you get it right, it looks really good. So we've got sunflowers, we've got Lisianthus, we've got sunflowers. And so I laid out all my sunflowers here. They've been perfectly conditioned to be able to do that. And this is a new variety that I'm trialing. So you can see over here, what I like about it is that unlike the Pro Cut, it does tend to be upward facing if you're storing it correctly. So for example, this was, not only was this not stored correctly, but you can see that I accidentally chopped off part of the stem. So we're gonna put this one on the side, so we're not gonna use that one. But I have had some that are a little bit less upward facing, like this one, for example. And sometimes it's actually dependent on when you harvest them because sunflowers are heliotropic, which means that they follow the sun. So the best time to harvest them, believe it or not, is during midday when they're completely facing the sun. So you get this. Or if you get lucky like me, you had a cloudy day at 7 p.m. and you harvested them. But some days I didn't have the full cloud coverage, but I'm actually really liking this sunflower. This is your traditional sunflower. I even brought the seed packet for those who are interested. This is a new variety that I'm trying. It's called Sunrich by Taki. It's F1, which means that it's a hybrid, and it's orange DMR, so it's resistant to downy mildew. And these were free seed that I got from an event at Farmer Bailey's, and I thought, why not? Let's try them. So for the traditional summer sunflower, I would probably stick with these instead of a Pro Cut. I've had this like love-hate relationship with Pro Cuts. There's just so many colors and variations that you can't find elsewhere. So Pro Cut Light, White Light, I will definitely grow, but where there are more options, I will definitely grow this one. All right, so then we have some rose lilies, and these I got really lucky with because I have the red scarlet lily beetle, and they definitely nod on the outer edges. But the good news about a rose lily is because it's double, I could actually peel off the layer. So you can't really see that here, but I peeled off the outside, and so it makes it look a lot more attractive. So that's one variety. I think this is Double Fantasy. I don't remember what this one is, but look at that. Isn't she gorgeous? We've got a few over here. Then we've got a bunch of called ancillary flowers and fillers. We've got some cosmos coming in. The last of the yarrow. We've got some self-seeded celosia. This year I'm putting in newer types of celosia because once you have celosia, you always have celosia. I have some status that I grew from seed. These are summer beauty alliums that are still blooming. In fact, I have many of these plants and some of them are just starting to throw up buds, so that's awesome. I've got some Persian cress, which is honestly a little bit of a pain to grow because I netted them and they are still flopping over a bit. Got like one lone snapdragon. Believe it or not, the snap did not have any thrips. I'm gonna check again. There are no thrips. I'm not gonna dwell too much over that because that's luck there. Got some rudbeckia that there's really not that much in the field anymore. Got some delphinium that's still blooming. This is another double lily called Blizzard. And then of course we've got mountain mint, which is in its prime right now. And this is my main filler. So my recipe is 3 sunflowers, 1 rose lily, 3 ancillary fillers, 2 Lisianthus, and then 3 mountain mint stems. And then, 2 yarrow too. And that's it. Last week I had a bouquet bar, and I talked about in my Patreon post how when I guide people on making bouquets, I find that having a strong first stem as an anchor is really easy for people to start building bouquets off of. So I define an anchor as something that is like a statement that can stand on its own. So this is a great example. And then I just start building around it. So one of the things to highlight about this week's bouquets is that they are a hybrid of annuals versus perennial. So for example, the rose lilies are perennial, the alliums are perennial, and then the mountain mint is perennial. And the mountain mint really is key here because it is gonna help me in terms of bulking up the bouquet. But we've obviously also got some other stuff like the sunflowers, which are clearly annual, the cosmos are annual, and then the cress annual. So there's some other stuff that's gonna become perennialized like the rudbeckia. But overall, this is a bit of a hybrid bouquet, and therefore the pricing of this bouquet from a cost perspective is not that bad. In fact, when I added everything up, it was about $11.50, and that is me being very generous, meaning me overestimating the amount of time it takes to harvest as well as plant some of these crops. So I'll get a little bit more into the specifics with the Lisianthus after, but just know that this bouquet will sell at $25. Let's just say the cost, if we round up, is $12. So every bouquet I'm netting $13. And this is an exercise that I'm forcing myself to do with every single flower subscription bouquet. And then I'm posting those detailed numbers on my Patreon. So if you're a member, go over there after this video and check it out. And if you're not a member, for $5 a month, I try to post high quality information at a relatively low price to really democratize a lot of the information that I feel should be out there, especially for beginner flower farmers. So it's a lot more business oriented, and we've got some health stuff in there too. But most of it is related to marketing, pricing, and so forth. So enough talking about these bouquets. I want to start talking about the topic that I brought up earlier. And in my first year, where I did not really understand flowers as well, I would have not only agreed with what this person said, but I probably would have promoted that even in my own YouTube videos. And in order to best explain this and why I disagree with it, I'm going to use analogs for you. So there are a lot of great analogs, especially in the food and beverage world, that I think are good examples for the flower industry to follow. What am I talking about? If you think about a scale from 1 to 10, where 10 is where that consumer can really identify what makes a certain product quality and therefore is willing to pay a little bit extra for quality and knows when to pay under, that's a 10. And so we're going to talk about products along the scale. To me, 10 is wine. So wine is something that Eric and I were a little bit into, especially when we lived in Germany. In fact, he had gone to culinary school in Paris, so he lived in Paris for a little bit while I lived in Berlin. And we spent a lot of time traveling around France as well as some parts of Germany where there's a lot of good wine. And what we learned is that the wine industry has done a lot for winemakers and really creating what I call like product segmentation, where the features and benefits are clearly laid out for the end consumer in a way that is just makes it really easier for that consumer to say, hey, yeah, like it's worth buying this. So what do? They created things like vintages. We went to a place in Champagne that made champagne. And you can't call your sparkling wine champagne if it's not from Champagne. They created these geographies where a premium name is attached to it. They created different types of blends. Like most people know that a Cabernet is red. There's even some, I feel, discrimination towards things like rosés, things that are in the middle. I think to cap it off with the cherry on top, the industry also created this distinction or title of sommelier. So if you go to a restaurant with a sommelier, you know that they are very serious about their wine. They're going to give you recommendations about expensive wines. You can pay thousands of dollars for a bottle of wine, and people will happily do that. Or you can pay $6 for a bottle of wine. And that's why I think that this analogy works in certain cases, because there's plenty of room in the wine business where if someone who just started out making wine wanted to give out their wine for free, it really wouldn't impact the person down the street in Napa who, like Opus, is selling at a very high price. What you find is that in Europe, where the wines are a little bit more accessible, the wine prices tend to be a little bit more middle of the road, if not a little bit cheaper than what we access here. But for the most part, we have good accessibility to a variety of different kinds of wines. All right, so wine is like that gold standard 10. After wine, I would say that the next one would be something like coffee, and even burgers fit in here. So coffee, also, if you guys didn't know, Eric and I are really into coffee. We still are. We care a lot about where coffee comes from. We buy good coffee. We buy not only sustainably grown coffee, but we buy whole beans. So I say this to give you guys some background as to why I know this. But coffee is one of those products that over the last 2 decades or so has really started becoming more mainstream. And so there's this whole new wave of coffee that is called third wave. And third wave coffee is basically just bougie coffee. It's specialty coffee. It's the coffee that you see that's labeled as single origin, meaning that all of the beans from this single origin came from the same place. Because most coffee is bought in a mix, meaning that multiple growers, especially from cooperatives, are coming together to pool their beans together. They create this mix, and that's how you get coffee. But the reason why I think coffee is becoming more mainstream is because of the fact that you can definitely start seeing certain mainstream brands like Folgers or McDonald's start putting labeling on their packaging that I'm very surprised about. For example, the other day we were running out of coffee. I happened to be at Walmart and I was like, all right, let me see what they have. And I will tell you that I sound like a snob right now, but their selection was absolutely atrocious. There was no whole beans. And I know that if you want to get coffee, you don't go to Walmart. I just happened to be there. So their selection wasn't great for whole beans, but I noticed that the McDonald's, it said 100% Arabica. So there are two coffee beans. There's Arabica, there's Robusta, and Arabica is considered the more premium type of coffee. So the fact that McDonald's is starting to label this, I think, says something about their understanding that consumers are also starting to understand a little bit more about coffee, and therefore they feel like they need to highlight that to not lose a part of the market. I will say that I buy McDonald's coffee when I go on a road trip, but I do not buy it for our home. I do think that is an interesting distinction, that they feel like even the everyday home consumer may now actually care about the type of bean where this coffee is coming from. All this to say, coffee is definitely moving along this scale. We're probably at a 6 or 7 right now, but the reality is that there are many coffee shops within a 1-mile radius, especially in a walking city, and they are all able to do well. These coffee chains can be selling like a $5 cup of coffee to $2. Some of them are even selling like a $15 cup, like Blue Bottle Coffee Company. There's a lot of room in that industry because consumers and the consumer trends have gravitated towards a place where more people now understand coffee and what makes coffee special. That's coffee. Now let's talk about burgers, which is the one in this example. I do think that over time, people have become a lot more attuned to what makes meat quality. And the industry has definitely helped here. So think about Whole Foods. Whole Foods has like their whole step rating system, and that was obviously built for their benefit. But people nowadays understand what it means to be grass-fed, pasture-raised. When it comes to chicken eggs, it's like cage-free, vegetarian. Not that's actually a good diet for a chicken. You want a chicken to be eating grubs and all that stuff. But the industry has really been trying to make strides to convince people that there are differences in different types of eggs, and that's why you should potentially pay more for one carton of eggs versus another. I would say that as we get closer to flowers on the scale, a good analogy for flowers is honey. I don't know about you guys, but I feel honey as a whole has tried to be like flowers, where there's local, there's raw honey, there's even honey that's been pollinated by bees who eat wildflowers. Like, I don't know how they determine that, but there's all of this stuff that they attach in marketing messages to honey. But for the most part, I would say the everyday consumer doesn't really care about honey, or doesn't really understand what they should care about. Honey and flowers to me are like at the 2 mark of that scale, where there's a lot of work that is going to be needed in order to persuade customers to buy that. And I think that work needs to be done more consistently at a grower level, and also like on an industry level. So what can industry do? Industry can create a certain set of terminology that all flower farmers are going to take on and try to spread the word about. They can also invest in places that care or that use a lot of flowers and try to also create certain types of grading. And you do start seeing it happen. And I don't see it necessarily from industry per se, but I do see it from more established growers. There's that new book called Floral Standards that was created by the Seattle Co-op. That's a really great first step, because that's one step towards standardizing local flowers in terms of quality and helping make sure that people who are growing flowers locally are putting their best foot forward. So that's why when some people say, hey, if you're going to grow local flowers and you're going to sell them, please try to do a good job in terms of selling good quality local flowers, because otherwise you run the risk of making some people feel like local flowers are actually inferior because some person who started this as a hobby doesn't know what they're doing and sold me a bunch of flowers that basically died after 3 days. Having those standards is really important in that regard. Having said all that, I would love to hear if you guys agree or disagree. And look, I don't say this to bash the person who wrote this. I say this because it made me think critically. Eric and I actually talked about it at dinner, and I was asking him about analogies, and of course he came up with analogies that no one here is going to even understand. He thought tires were actually a good analogy, which I don't disagree with him on. But tires are, I don't mean a stereotype, but for the common female like myself, like I don't care about tires until I need tires. And when I go into the shop, I can see that there are a ton of different options, but the features and benefits of each tire is usually laid out pretty clearly to me. That way at point of sale, I am able to make what I feel is an informed decision as to whether or not I pay a little extra for something that I need because there's a feature or benefit that I want, versus something like flowers where obviously at point of sale, no one is saying to that person, hey, how long these Lisianthus took to grow? You know that this certain type of Lisianthus isn't shippable, in the sense that you're not gonna see it at your local grocery store. Like no one's saying that. So it's a lot harder with that local produce again, and it does take industry and society to shift together in order to elevate a certain type of commodity product where people see as being, I've got a $25 bouquet here. What makes that so different from the $15 bouquet that my local grocery store is selling? Look at that. Let's now talk about the pricing behind these bouquets. So I had mentioned earlier that most of these were grown from perennials, and that really helped with the cost side of the equation, of course. But I want to talk a little bit about Lisianthus because this was the first year that I grew more than like a couple hundred. In fact, I ordered 6 trays. Each tray was 125, which totals to 750. And if you assume about a 20% attrition, which I think I had definitely less than 20% attrition at the rate we're going right now, we're looking at around, we'll call it 600 Lisianthus. Now, Lisianthus was by far the biggest contributor to the cost side of the equation. And the reason is actually due to something that I wasn't really paying attention to. And it's the fact that these were sold in 125 increments. The implication is that from a plug perspective, including shipping, I paid about 94 cents per plug. You add on labor of growing it, of harvesting it. The labor of growing it was definitely the most of all the other plants because you have to clear the bed, you have to plant it, you have to net it. I counted the time it took to break out the net, to set up the netting. And then last but not least, there's weeding involved because this crop takes forever to start getting bigger, and it took 2 rounds of weeding. What helped with my cost was the fact that I have now hired these 2 middle schoolers who are awesome. They're actually coming today and they help me weed. And because they're 2 middle schoolers, I get 2 for the price of 1. So I pay each of them $10 an hour. I do tip them once in a while when they're here for a pretty long time and it's hot outside. But basically their labor is half my labor, and weeding something like Lisianthus is honestly not that hard, especially if you're on top of it relatively early, right? Like we're weeding the baby weeds out. I say all this because the labor was still a little bit expensive per stem, and then we're harvesting it. So each Lisianthus stem ultimately costs me $1.29 to grow. It can still be profitable, but when you think about how much I'm valuing this Lisianthus stem at, I'm valuing this one, look, this one should be $4 because of how many blooms it has, but there could be another Lisianthus over here, which this one's not full yet, but it's gonna open. This would probably be priced at $3, maybe $3.50 at most. So there's a bit of a range here. You can't guarantee that all the Lisianthus is gonna have big sprays of blooms. I'm pricing these anywhere from $3.50 to $4. The rose lilies I'm pricing at $4, but the rose lilies are perennialized. So now you can start seeing what a big difference there is between having something that's perennial versus something that's annual, and both are considered premium. And I would argue that today, rose lilies are equally as beloved, and people, like retail customers, love them even though they're technically a lily. People don't know that. So this is really important because as you think about structuring your bouquets, if your bouquet is very Lisianthus heavy and you don't have anything like fillers or perennials to help round them out, your bouquet is actually not as profitable as you would think. And again, if you are undergoing the summer slump, you haven't really built out your customer base, then it's even worse because now you're caught in a place where you can't even move those Lisianthus. And the fault that people go to is they usually start discounting. And that's a really bad spot to be in, especially with such a specialty crop like Lisianthus. I wanted to talk about this math at least high level with you guys to make sure that you understand. For the most part, I would think that you can take my numbers as a threshold, obviously adjust for how much you paid for plugs or if you started from seed, but add in the cost of growing those seed to maturity. And you can probably also calculate a rough number for how much that ingredient costs in your bouquet. This year, I'm taking a different approach from pricing. I'm not assigning a number per stem. So if I had assigned a number per stem, I would get to about $23 because sunflowers are like about $2.50. The yarrow is about maybe $1. The mountain mints, 50 cents, right? So you start adding all those numbers together and then you get to a number that's supposed to be built in with your profit, but I still don't know how much my profit is. So this year I took this approach, which is a lot harder, but a lot more informative around how much did it cost me to buy the plugs or the seeds? How much did it cost me to grow it and harvest it? And what I do is I track the time. I back out from all of the time that was spent, put it into a minutes number, convert the minutes. I'm laughing. A bird just came over and took a Japanese beetle in its mouth. If I convert the amount of time into minutes, I sign a per value per minute based off of a $20 an hour rate, and then I can convert it per flower, like literally down to per stem. So that's what I'll show on my Patreon if you guys want the details. But these bouquets were a little bit more profitable than I thought because honestly, I don't have enough Lisianthus coming in right now. I will have more Lisianthus coming in over the next couple of weeks. So my next flower subscription bouquet is actually in 2 more weeks instead of 4 weeks out because I want my subscribers to see the best of Lisianthus, and those will be primarily Lisianthus, and they will be my least profitable bouquets, but they will be the best value for my customers. All right, so I've made like 5 bouquets right now. I need to make at least another dozen. By the way, I'd calculate how much time it would take me to make 1 bouquet so I can use up my calculations because I'm dramatically slower at making bouquets while talking, but I'm gonna let this go on a time lapse so you can see me build without me talking. So I'm almost done making the bouquets, but I have to hop on inside because E is about to wake up. But I have a new folding technique that I want to show you. And I think that this is a better technique, especially when you have flowers that are a little bit more facing this way that may not be facing upwards. And the credit goes to b.a.r.e from Blossom and Branch. She did a recent video about having a market on her own property and they were selling peonies, and she showed how she wrapped it. So I really liked it, and let me point the camera down so that you can see what she did. So she had, I think it was a square piece of paper, but it basically became a rectangle. So I have a rectangle over here, and you fold a little piece over here. So then what you do is you take a bouquet and you lay it in the middle, and then you just fold up like that. And she staples it twice, but I'm just gonna staple it once over here. And what I like about this one is that it's got more of an outward facing type of spray for the flowers, and it still doesn't go down, so it's like pretty snug, and it just feels like a higher perceived value. So that's how I'm gonna wrap all of my bouquets today.